Hi, I'm Jennifer Cohn. I'm an election integrity advocate, and I'm here with Marilyn Marks, another election integrity advocate of the Coalition for Good Governance. Hi, Marilyn.
Hi, Jenny.
How are you?
I'm great. Thank you so much for your interest in what we're doing.
I'm always interested in what you're doing. In particular, the reason I wanted to talk to you today is because there was the announcement today that the Department of Justice is challenging Georgia's voting bill, which is called SB 202. And I saw
Right.
a reporter in Georgia mentioned that that lawsuit by the DOJ does not include the takeover provisions. And I remembered from speaking with you previously that your lawsuit on behalf of the Coalition for Good Governance does address the takeover provisions. And so I was hoping to discuss this with you. And first, if you could explain to me what those takeover provisions are.
Okay. Thanks, Jenny. As you know, there are 8 now lawsuits, including the Department of Justice lawsuit. We are the 7th that was filed, and we're the only ones addressing what we think is the most dangerous aspect of SB 202, the takeover provision. In short, it means that the State Board of Elections can, for purely trivial reasons, wipe out a county bipartisan board of elections and replace that entire board with a one-person partisan appointee. They can do it at the beginning or the end or the middle of an election and completely control the process and the outcome of an election, completely subverting democracy. That's the long and short of it.
My God. So that provision really did get quite a bit of attention, at least on social media. I know a lot of legal scholars and others were saying that that was the most dangerous provision in the bill. And it surprised me a little that the Department of Justice didn't take it on. But I'm glad that you have. Can you tell me a little bit about your lawsuit that challenges that provision?
We can. I didn't actually expect the Department of Justice to take it on, Jenny. And the reason is that their lawsuit is very much focused on racial disparity from top to bottom. That is what their case is about. And certainly that needs to have a good, strong case with the power of the US government behind it. But our case, in fact, recognizes that there are many good organizations and plaintiffs that are taking on those racial claims. What our case does is take on the takeover provision, as well as something that will be near and dear to your heart, and that is the citizens' rights to oversee their elections, and also the press's rights to report on elections. Those things have been trampled. And just like you were saying about the takeover provision, that it got some press, but not a lot, the First Amendment trampling has hardly gotten any. But going back to the takeover provision for a moment, we went through 45, 60 days or so of legislative effort in Georgia, where the Republicans were determined that they were going to take much more control of elections through lawmaking. And unfortunately, we could not get the press's attention or the big nonprofit org's attention on this very dangerous takeover until the very end. There was very little press, very little testimony about it, but we were kind of screaming about it all the time. But on the night that Governor Kemp signed the bill, it's what Rachel Maddow led with. Even though there had not been much reporting, she led with the fact that these takeover provisions were just signed into law. And she got it immediately as to the danger of the state putting one person in charge of a large county's elections and operating behind closed doors. The examples are this. The way that this law is written is that all it takes is 3 minor violations over the period of 4 years for any county to completely lose their bipartisan board. I'm talking about violations of rules that would be trivial. Things like forgetting to print a poll watcher's badge, the humidity controls in the warehouse going too high, the failure to seal up a box, It happens in every single county. All 159 counties in Georgia will admit that at any point in time, they're in violation of at least 3 rules. And so the state election board, which is now made up of 3 Republicans, 1 Democrat, and then the Republican governor will be appointing another Republican probably for the chair. They will determine any particular board that they want to get rid of, and they can do it in a very quickly held hearing. And it is pretty much a permanent change. There's very little the board can do to fight back, including, Jenny, as a lawyer, you will just hardly believe this. Included in the bill or in the new law is the requirement that the counties cannot pay attorney's fees to fight this on behalf of their board.
Wow.
So if a board were to get removed, they're not allowed to have paid attorney's fees.
That's crazy. I apologize for my dog in the background.
No problem.
Yeah, so can you explain to me what would be sort of a worst-case scenario of this takeover provision and how it might impact, let's say it's 2024 and a presidential election, for example?
Okay, and it could certainly happen faster than that. So Secretary Raffensperger, let's put it in reality here. Secretary Raffensperger has been announcing as recently as this week his continued displeasure with Fulton County. And Fulton County, of course, has close to 1 million voters. It is Atlanta and the surrounding area. It is highly Democratic. It is the most Democratic county, of course, in the state. So the Republicans don't like Fulton County, let's face it. But he has been expressing again and again his displeasure with them as recently as this week, saying that their management needs to be fired. He has been hinting that he will take them over. He's got a growing list of violations that he will use as the excuse, I believe, to take them over whenever he wants. Now, a lot of people don't understand how this takeover works, but thank you for asking that. He and the state election board can put in their partisan person, wipe out the election board. Let's say at the very stage you're talking about presidential 2024, you can talk about midterms, or you can talk about the upcoming November Atlanta mayor's race, which is going to be a very big election, very contentious election. So he can take over at any time, months ahead of time, and start in the precinct planning. Oh, here's where we're going to open and close precincts. Here's how much equipment we're going to give this precinct, how much staffing we're going to give that precinct, which absentee ballots came in on time, which provisional ballots are we going to count? All of this will be done behind closed doors because we no longer have a public body. We no longer have the bipartisan, opposing views sitting there in the room arguing over in public, the press can report on it, arguing over where they want to put a polling place or not, or close a polling place, or offer more training, or offer more voter outreach. And instead, all this will be done by one person if the secretary were to take over. The takeover provision, as I said, they don't even allow the board to have their paid attorney's fees to fight this. There is a very little appeal process that they can go through, and there is actually no way to really get them back into office. The way that the provision is written, it's pretty much a permanent takeover. So it is incredibly dangerous, taking our elections into the dark. You're muted right now, so I can't hear you.
Oh, thank you. When we talk about attorney's fees, normally the board members might have been able to sue for an abuse of discretion, saying that these were just minor violations. But as a practical matter, now they won't be able to because they aren't going to be able to recover their attorney's fees if they were to challenge.
It's not even just recover. They just won't even have anybody. Normally the county budget, of course, pay for the county attorneys to represent boards when they get sued. When they get sued all the time, it's not just recovery. They will not have access to attorneys. And the way they have this written without boring your readers with all of the,
No, I think they'll like
the
this.
minor
This is good.
details, they have it, the way they have it written is that the board would not even be able to accept pro bono attorney assistance.
Wow, that's crazy.
So in
That's
other words,
crazy.
they do not want the board members to put up a fight.
And this goes to one of the legal bases for your challenge, right? Which is actually the right of the board members to have a job.
That's correct. And so we have several county board of election members who are in our plaintiffs group.
Mm-hmm.
And they are the ones who have standing to challenge this takeover provision.
I thought that was just
because
a genius legal argument to take it from their perspective.
Right. Well, their jobs are being threatened. And of course, they don't make much money at these jobs at all. I mean, they're almost volunteer, but they have a right to perform this public service of being on the election board. And that right is being taken away from them through no fault of their own. Jenny, the law is so capricious and arbitrary that, let's take the case of Fulton County. They have a fairly new chairman. He's only been in a couple of 3 months. The way this works is he can be fired along with the entire board for violations that occurred 3 years ago, long before he even got there. I mean, it's not meant to be fair. It's not meant to be firing for cause. It's meant to be a total political move to get rid of county and to control counties that they want to control.
It's a power.
So some people, it is. And some people think, oh, it only happens that they take over, like if they don't like the way the votes came out. Well, they could do that, but it is much more likely that they will take over from the beginning of an election, and they can twist all the levers so that they don't have to change the vote at the end. There were enough types of suppression, enough types of discretion that was used to decide who votes and who doesn't, so that they don't need to change the vote totals. And they're essentially in control of the whole process.
And when it comes to certifying election results, can they affect that as well?
Yes, it's being, of course, today, the bipartisan board gets together and it takes a majority of the bipartisan board to agree to certify the results. That's all done in public. If there's a question, the press gets to raise a question, the public, a candidate, a party gets to raise a question. No, it'll be done by one person. No more public oversight of that function.
And so that's the other basis, is that right? Is the public's right to oversee their elections? That
is one of the bases, yes, and brought by our voter plaintiffs. That yes, the public, our plaintiffs have been accustomed to going into, let's take Fulton County, the Fulton County board meetings every month, expressing their views on where polling places should be, or how absentee ballots should be better distributed, and expressing views on how the elections to be run, and being part of it, and then observing that process, checking the provisional ballots and how many are being counted, et cetera. And all of this will be taken away from them if the state takes over a county, which, as I say, can be done with no judicial overview, just the snap of fingers, and it's done. And so the other thing that we're challenging, that's part of this due process claim, is the separation of powers. What's happening here is that the state legislature has delegated way too much of their power to the state election board. State legislature is supposed to be setting up how these county election boards are run, and they're allowing the state election board to just willy-nilly change that, and giving them with way too much power, so that the people who would be going to their legislators, right, to say, here's how I want my county's election board structured, with so many Democrats, so many Republicans, et cetera, and have the representatives hopefully listening to them. Now they're turning it over to an executive branch, the state election board, with no accountability, and who gets to decide on a whim what the structure of the superintendent's office will be in a county. So that's another basis for our claims here.
So an improper delegation of authority.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay,
Yes.
so then just to summarize, so the three main legal arguments are are what again? They are
The separation of powers,
separation of powers
and the collapsing of that, and the citizens' rights to oversee their elections.
Okay.
And then the taking away of the power for these election board members to do this public service, to have their jobs.
Right, threatening their jobs.
Yes.
This is brilliant.
And there are a variety of claims in here that are interwoven, but essentially you're getting to the big picture point of it, that there are processes in place that are long established in the United States for how we conduct our elections. These guys are just trying to completely turn them on their heads, to essentially have an authoritarian form of an election, but it's totally undemocratic. This is kind of a Castro type election, right?
Yeah.
One guy's got to control everything that's done.
I'm so glad that you're taking this on, and I do want to actually discuss also the First Amendment provisions that you're raising in your complaint. But before that, I want to point out that you have a history of winning federal litigation in Georgia, and that really made a big difference, I think, in this last election. And I'm wondering if you could maybe explain that to me. I'm talking about the voting machines.
Yes, thanks. Well, thank you. Yes, there was a landmark decision. Never before has a court declared a voting system unconstitutional. And we were able to get that done in Georgia and got rid of the paperless DREs. Unfortunately, the state replaced them with ballot marking devices, which we are continuing that case to get those also declared unconstitutional. Yes, and we've had some nice wins in that case. The judge granted paper poll book backups for for the electronic poll books. Unfortunately, the state has appealed that for no good reason.
So they want let me just pause there really quick. So they want to have poll books or the check-in computers, and they go down all the time. I mean, Los Angeles County had a complete meltdown about a year ago. Georgia had some issues with it too, pretty bad. And they don't want to have paper.
Very bad. And they don't want paper backups. And you remember the problem with the scanners, that the scanners were not picking up all the mail ballot votes. And the judge said, no, you got to fix this. And the state has appealed that as well. I think we will win those appeals, but yes, we've been doing fine in the courts. We don't win them all, but we're sure in there trying the hard things that many other people just will not try, Jenny.
Exactly.
That's what we did here with SB 202. We carved out a niche for ourselves on the things that we thought were incredibly important, but we're not getting the attention of the big voting rights organizations and going to the First Amendment things. So one of the things that we're challenging is what we call the gag rule. They literally made the law that says that if I, as a poll monitor, go into the absentee ballot processing room and I see a stack of ballots that's just not being counted, or even, oh gosh, it looks like they've got 2 days worth here that they've still got to get through before anybody can give you a tally. I see ballots that are being scanned 3 times or not being scanned at all, or the scanner is jamming. I'm not allowed to pick up the phone and call you and let you or anyone else, and can't let anyone know. I can't even.
I'm sorry, I'm interrupting you.
Go ahead. Go right ahead.
No, I just wanted to point out how important this is because as we've seen, well, the vendors themselves are not even subject to public records laws. And so the only ways that you can have an idea of what is going on is to have the public and the media be able to observe what's going on.
Right.
But like
And
the
so
audit in Arizona, there's media that is providing an invaluable service. So that would not be possible.
not only that, but look at the number of ballots that we've seen photographs of in Arizona. Not that Arizona is anything we model, but aren't we glad that we do have photographs of what's going on there? In
Right.
Georgia, with this new law, no photographs. The media would not be allowed to photograph that process. You cannot photograph anything that's got a voted ballot in it. So think of all of the processing that we see, that the media comes in and takes pictures. The media also couldn't report, oh, they've got about 1,000, it looks like ballots they've got yet to scan tonight. This is an attempt by the Secretary of State. This is really his bill. This is an attempt by the Secretary of State to shut down transparency. Just like the idea of I'm going to have one appointee to operate behind closed doors. I'm not going to let critics go speak to the press. I'm not going to let the press in to talk about what problems there may be. It's really absurd. So there's a photography ban. There's a gag rule. One of the other things that's a combination of it's really voter intimidation and First Amendment is that, there's incredibly large screens, the touch screens of the BMDs in Georgia, the Dominion screens. They are just totally violate the secret ballot.
Can I pause you right there? What is a ballot marking device? Can you just explain that briefly so for people who don't know?
Oh, sure. A ballot marking device is an electronic touch screen that where you touch your choices and it prints supposedly your choices on a piece of paper, prints out your choices. And in Georgia, South Carolina, and other states, it's actually printed into a barcode so that you don't even really know what your official vote says. But so in Georgia, the touch screens are huge, enormous. They are very upright. They are very brightly lit. I wish I had a couple of pictures to show you here, but they're very brightly lit. And you can stand 30 feet away and see who somebody's voting for without even looking. We have interns who have driven up into parking lots to do our election observation for us, driven up into parking lots of polling places, and sitting in their car, they could see through the windows at how people were voting. It is that absurd. So we've complained and complained about the loss of the secret ballot. And so what the state is doing now is they've made it a felony if you intentionally see. How are they going to prove who's intentionally looking and who's just walking to their voting machine? It is a voter intimidation tactic like you can't believe. There have been some African-American members of ours who have been protesting against Barry Fleming, who was the sponsor of SB 202. They've been protesting him in their communities to get him fired as their county attorney. They are now afraid to go vote in the polling place because they are afraid somebody will charge them with intentionally looking at one of these big screens.
I remember
you
when
you can't even help looking.
No, you can't. When they first came out in California, parts of California, a friend of mine told me that she could see, this is actually several years ago, that she could see like from 50 feet away. And it matters, especially if these are neighborhood polling places, where you have your neighbors manning the polling station. You don't want your neighbor maybe to see that you voted for someone different than they might expect you to vote for.
Well, where we have seen it at a level that would just break your heart and make you want to cry is we have been to rural Georgia in places that are heavily red counties, and you will see people coming in who clearly are uncomfortable in their tiny little polling places. They walk in and it's their Sunday school teacher who is the poll manager. And it's the landlord who is the person who checks them in. They're literally sitting there watching how these people vote and telling them things like, your daddy was in here this morning. He told me to make sure you vote right.
Oh my gosh.
And, we have watched people stand at the machines and look over their shoulder and worry. You could see the worry. Should I vote for who I want to? And you think about what's going on within the Republican Party right now, Jenny, and imagine Republicans who may not want to vote for Trump or may not want to vote for some of the more right-wing Republicans, and the kind of pressure that they are going to feel if their community is watching who they vote for. This is just not okay.
Exactly. So
And
that's something else that you're challenging is basically
yes,
loss of an anonymous vote. Well, thank you. Is there anything else that you want to talk about regarding your lawsuit or your work that I haven't asked you about?
I guess that the one thing is we're such a small little organization, and we operate all volunteer, exception of our young intern and our attorneys. And we are at a place that we need to ask for the public's help in being able to keep this engine going. We do this all on a very, very low overhead basis, but we've got enormous legal bills that we need help with. We're out there doing work that nobody else is doing. And so we're trying to protect the public's right to their ballot being counted properly.
I always want to support you when you guys need financial assistance. I think you are honestly the best election security advocate in the country, the most effective anyway. And as far as boots on the
well, thank you.
Sort of thing, how can people donate to your organization?
If you go to coalitionforgoodgovernance.org, coalitionforgoodgovernance.org, and go to the donate page, and there is a donate button online. And then if people prefer to write a check, there's an address for our board secretary. And you can know that every gift to us goes a long way because we have no overhead at all. It's all going directly to litigation support.
You guys are lean and mean. Okay, fantastic. And you're also, what is your Twitter handle?
Well, mine is Marilyn R. Marks 1. And I always forget the Coalition for Good Governance one, but if you look up Coalition for Good Governance, you'll find it. But most of our work I tweet out as well, Marilyn R. Marks 1. And I think it's up on my screen right now.
Okay. It is fantastic. All right.
Okay.
Thank you, Marilyn. Thank you for all of
Thank you, Jenny.
And have a wonderful weekend. We'll talk soon.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.